That was lovely.
That was Ivor Novello. It's the music that opens the film Gosford Park. I love Ivor Novello and Noel Coward and all those Cole Porter. I was born 20 years too late, actually. I think I just love all that stuff. It's
amazing. Now, I read an article somewhere that said, as well as having apparently a substantial library in your house, and that you like to have your living room quite small. I honestly, I'm worse than a stalker. I also read that you like to play piano, according to this article, at least a couple of hours a day. You have a piano. This is very important to you. Is it just a passion for playing, or is it a cathartic thing, or is it what's the drive?
It's a bit of both, actually. It's smart of you to ask that. But I have a Steinway in my house, which I bought about 10 years ago. Always aspired to buy a brand new one. And it's just an amazing piano, and I've got an right upstairs, which actually I also enjoy playing. But when you've been spending the day with an orchestra and you're doing something modern, perhaps, or like today, we had a hard day doing recording sessions. In the evening, you go home, the piano's there, and instead of having your head in a score, you've got the score in your head, and you can just play whatever you like, and it doesn't matter. That's when I really like to improvise, actually, because then it becomes cathartic, because you actually feel kind of liberated from having the music in front of you, and so I enjoy all of that. And I play for a couple of hours a day, but I don't probably practice enough, because when I have something important to play, I have to really kind of practice, and then practice is hard work, but you really don't have to practice very much to really enjoy the piano. So I know I enjoy doing that.
Oh, fantastic. Just going off tangent a little bit, at the interval I thought I'd really get the party buzzing by playing your Requiem here.
We were saying, yeah. Actually, I said, what's that music? At first I didn't recognise it.
Nothing signals a party like a Mass for the Dead. So the piece in question was the Requiem for a Child's Skull. This was a piece that was awarded a Juno Award in 2003, which is for classical music, Canadian classical music. Now, obviously, I'm not alone here. There's a number of us from Foden's band who were fortunate enough a few years ago to perform this piece at the very festival we were playing at last night. And our chorus was made up of students from the Northern College of Music. But it's a very, very emotive piece of music, and the text is sort of drawn from a particular time and place. I wondered if you could sort of share with everybody what the inspiration was behind it, and how you found yourself coming to write what was a utterly a fascinating piece of work, but something really quite powerful.
Well, it's really dark. I've been asked to write a piece for the 1999 Made in Canada Festival for the Toronto Symphony, and but it was not to be the Toronto Symphony performing, although they were organising the concert. It was with Hannaford Band and a wonderful choir in Toronto called the Amadeus Choir. Really fantastic. And I was wondering what to write, and I thought there were a lot of things that were a little bit of a humbug nature that were around in 1999, and I must confess that I wasn't a great fan of the Millennium Dome, and it got into terrible trouble before it finally found a role and a place in our lives, and it seemed to me to be a lot of humbug going around, especially at that particular time. There was the war in Kosovo, Serbia, the Balkans were really in a terrible state, and nobody seemed to be dealing with that, and I don't usually get involved politically. I keep my own political opinions quiet, because there's nothing more boring than an artist, let me share my opinion about politics with you. Yawn, it's usually...
Not a fan of U2 and Bono.
No, I don't go in that direction. But but on that occasion, I read an article in one of the papers about this war photographer who'd taken a picture of a farmhouse in Kosovo that had been set alight with Kosovan soldiers inside by an enemy unit, and they afterwards had counted 29 skulls among the decapitated bodies inside. One of the skulls was charred from the flames after they set it alight and put on a windowsill as a kind of trophy and warning. And this image of a child's skull became instrumental in ending the war. And so I called it Requiem for a Child's Skull, and it's got quite an optimistic bent to it until the very end. But it became actually my most performed piece at that time, and had quite a lot of performances, won this little prize. And the funny thing was that when it was nominated for the Juno Award, they have Junos in heavy metal as well, and the guy who nominated it on behalf of the record company told me that he was at this ceremony where the nominations are read out and the successful ones are included. A bit like it's this Canadian Grammy, basically. So there were all these heavy metal guys with tattoos and chains at this event, and this classical guy got up and said, amongst the awards is Requiem for a Charred Skull by Bramwell Tovey, and all these metalheads went, cool.
Amazing. Taking such a subject of sort of such injustice, was it a difficult process to try and do justice to something of such brevity? Obviously the vehicle of a requiem is ideal for that particular story. Was it a challenge or?
Funnily enough, it just sort of poured out. The text itself is so powerful. I'm not a Catholic, as you know, so, but the Requiem Aeternam, the trumpet shall sound on the other side, the day of judgment, and so on. All of that is a 13th century construct from the Catholic Church, and it's beautiful poetry. And it's been set by every composer under the sun, many of whom are now decomposers. And it just became an opportunity to set it myself. And actually, once I'd started, and I end on the word lux, meaning light, light eternal. And the word lux cuts out at the end quite abruptly, as if the light goes out, because I wanted to give it a contemporary relevance. And so it was actually, I wrote it pretty fast. In fact, I wrote it in about 2 weeks, and then there was an instrumental movement, I don't remember. And I remember writing that in a hotel room in Australia, trying not to wake our baby, who was with me on the trip in Adelaide. And in those days, I had to fax it to the copyist in Winnipeg, who then had to fax the parts or whatever to the band. So when I flew back from Australia and went to Toronto, the parts were already on the stand. We thought that was all terribly modern to fax things around.
2 weeks. Because it's not a short piece of music, is it?
No, I write pretty fast, but I don't do the computer. I can do it, but very, very slowly. So I write everything longhand, but actually I do it very quickly.
Your actions, by the way. Could you do computer one more time?
Longhand. And I goes to a chap in Winnipeg who I've worked with for about 25 years. He does does everything, in fact, that I do.
I really want to have a look at some of the composition stuff. Obviously this weekend we've been performing quite a lot of your pieces, which has been fantastic. But that process that you talk about, obviously you've said it's quite a quick process. Is it always the same process? Do you compose firstly at the piano and then score it out later for whichever ensemble you're writing for, or do you have a vision of the ensemble first of all and then write straight to scores? I know different people do it different ways. What's the approach that you have?
Well, do you want if I give you the honest truth?
It's not being filmed, don't worry.
Oh, good. I think sometimes I really do plan, like the work we recorded this afternoon, Night to Sing. I planned that very carefully and wrote it over the course of several months. And I wanted a particular construct that would be very difficult for the bands to play and justify its use in a competition. The other piece that we played, the trumpet concerto, I wrote that very fast because I was in the middle of an opera at the time. And that I tend to throw down on paper. And then I was just talking to Andy about the film that I wrote a score for, 18. That was written in the white heat of, I had a full conducting schedule, but I was asked to write a movie score. And I'd always wanted to try it. And sadly, as with all film composers, half your music ends up on the cutting room floor. And although you can get it all on iTunes, the whole score is available on iTunes, but not all of it made it to the movie. But I tend to write pretty fast, and usually I'm in a hurry because I can't give up my day job. So I get up very early in the morning. Usually I'm up at around by 6. I work at my desk from about 6 till 9. If I have a 10 o'clock rehearsal, then I'm out the door. But if I have a 10 o'clock rehearsal, I've already done 3 hours work. And usually I compose at that time because the brain is very fresh and energized, unless I'm behind on preparing something to conduct, or unless I've got to play the piano somewhere, and I'm terrified, which is usually, of the 3 things I do, I find playing the piano the most terrifying.
Wow. I just sort of rewind there a little bit. I like the fact that you have a full-time schedule, and then something comes in to disrupt it, which is the writing of a film score. if I turn up to work in the morning and I've got cover for a Year 8 science, I freak out.
Same kind of thing, actually.
There's a mismatch somewhere.
But your skill set is much more difficult than mine. I mean, because I wouldn't be able to do the covering for a Year 8. My wife's a music teacher, so I see what she does sometimes, and she does things that we wouldn't have expected Mozart to do.
That's okay. I think mostly when I have a cover, I get them to move stuff from one part of the school to another. It's very effective. And then back again. Talking of one of the pieces we performed this weekend and indeed recorded today was the Night to Sing, which is the VE Day celebrations. And again, it's a fabulous score. It's something that I know that somebody asked at the interval, what's the connection with Foden's band, and I know that we will kind of get onto that slightly, but this piece was something that was commissioned for the 2005 British Open.
Yes,
that's right, and it's a fantastic score. But you were telling us that that actually it was inspired by, was it a picture that you saw? Or?
Well, when I was asked to write the piece, I was reading a book by a woman called Maureen Waller called London 1945. It was all about what happened once the war had ended, how soldiers came back, how families had traumatic times. It was before I was born, of course. It was difficult, soldiers coming back, and people had been living apart, and suddenly they were thrown together, and houses that were roomy suddenly were packed with people. And there were lots of difficulties, and of course a lot of partying on the 8th of May. And I happened to read about this government mass observation officer who was interviewing somebody, or had overheard a comment rather. This woman had said, it was an incredible night, the 8th of May. If ever there was a night, this was the night to sing. And I thought, what an incredible thing she said. So I called it the Night to Sing. And basically I looked at lots of photographs of that night. There's lots of photographs on the web. You just enter 8th of May 1945, or VE Day, up they come. And lots of congas. The conga was a wild dance then. I mean, most people here are too young probably to remember that, but it was there's one or two, but it was lots of congas and dancing, and I asked my mum where she was on VE Day. She was in Romford, and I dedicated the piece to her. And if you look at the pictures, you see Victorians and Edwardians and young men and women, babies, all partying together. And so the music is like a huge, 1 minute it's all sort of rough and tumble, and the next minute it sounds like an Edwardian song, and then a Victorian bit. But it's quasi-pastiche, but it's all sort of hangs together. Anyway.
Well, I was going to ask, I mean, in terms of those pieces you've written, I mean, this is the only one that's a real test piece. I know you've written commentary variations many years ago. When you're approaching, I'm assuming everyone in here has got some connection to brass bands, but for those who don't, brass bands, when they get together for a competition, everyone generally plays the same test piece, and three wise men will sit behind a screen and decide who plays that piece the most accurately, or the most musically, or whichever particular set of criteria they're following on the day. But everyone plays the same piece of music. Therefore, when you're asked to have a commission that is to write a piece of music for a competition, does that impact any way in your process? Are you thinking
for sure,
about?
yeah. Because I noticed that there were a lot of how can I put this? There are a lot of very confident conductors in the band movement, as there are in the world, and conducting is a terrifying thing if you do it properly. And so I wanted to put. I mean, I know being a conductor, I know exactly what's hard. So I filled the score with all these incredibly intricate, difficult rhythms that were awkward to catch the beat of, and yet when they're wrong, as you know, you notice and the music doesn't sound right. So I spent a lot of time putting that together, and all of that was fantastic and dandy until we had to record it today and I had to conduct it. But yeah, she put things in like that, and also like the euphonium solo, which Glenn played so magnificently today, has a high E flat, which rarely appears because it's a lousy note on the instrument. And I gave it to the euphonium 3 times three bars in a row, marked it pianissimo. And then there were top notes for the corner, and you put these things in because they're tests, but you try and make them, if you do it properly, make it part of the narrative of the story of VE Day. So those moments were actually in a slow section, which was all about the lament of those who didn't live to see that day. And so you can either listen to it as a terrifying test piece, or you can listen to it as a piece of music about the day.
Do you ever think about the kind of misery that you're putting upon certain players through your composition?
Oh, do I? I didn't think of that.
Hell yeah.
But that's part of the feel, though, isn't it? And you kind of do that. But I mean, with a band like Foden's, and you've got people coming from across the country to, or they're at work in Birmingham or whatever, then they come home in the evening to play at Foden's. They're already driving at high speed to get there, an hour and a half, 2 hours of driving, and they want to have something to get their teeth stuck into when they get there. So it was important to do that.
Well, one of the other pieces we played last night was the Songs from Paradise Saloon, which was drawn from another major composition. This is your first opera that you've written, which there's a requiem, there's concertos, there's opera. I mean, these are major structures and pieces that you've written. It's an incredible undertaking to write an entire opera.
You have to be insane to do it.
Well, I was about to say, first of all, why?
What was I thinking?
Yes, I mean, obviously it's a wonderful story, which I would love if you would share with us.
Well, it's about a guy who was one of the first people to be called a terrorist. He was a mass murderer. He blew up an ocean-going liner so that he could claim insurance money from a bogus cargo of gold, apparently. And he was a smuggler. Smuggled contraband, swindled people during the American Civil War, and then finally people started to catch up with him. And I read about this in a Starbucks. Somebody left this newspaper lying on the table, and that's where I got the story from. It was the Requiem of the Child Skull and the Mass Murderer opera. I'm actually quite a cheerful person, so I was kind of... But I got a commission to write for the Calgary Opera. They'd asked me to write an opera, and I wrote it, and we gave a concert performance in Vancouver with my orchestra, and we recorded it, and it's coming out on Naxos Records in a couple of months' time, so make great Christmas presents.
Good work. And drawn from the opera, there's also the third piece that we played of yours at the concert last night and recorded today, which is Songs from the Paradise Saloon, where you portray lots of different characters and people of ill repute, and that, I'm sure you'll describe it in a much better way than I will. And then sort of within this, the trumpet soloist is creating the different characters through his flugel.
Well, I imagine there's a scene in the opera called the Paradise Saloon in New York where the swindler he's a bit of a sort of Bernie Madoff figure, but he's also very violent, and he leaves a wife who's pregnant, rather an unmarried woman with twins, that he just dumps her and goes off, marries someone else. He is very cruel, he's manipulative, he was a real historical character. His name was Alexander Keith, and he was altogether just a dreadful individual, perfect for opera, and very dramatic. And at the end, after he blew up this ocean-going liner, something clicked in his head, and he looked at the scene, and he said, "What have I done?" And shot himself. But it took 5 days to die, and very operatic. And I think...
was he singing the whole time?
No, we had Puccini would have done that, but I didn't do that. Verdi would have done that for sure. But I think it's the whole thing about writing an opera is that you want to dramatize a story. So in the Songs of the Paradise Saloon, I imagine that it's not the night in the opera in the Paradise Saloon when he gets caught and he has to escape after a fight. It's the night before, when he's the master of all he surveys, when he's able to completely manipulate people and to distort the truth and to do that sort of swindling thing that people part with their money if something sounds too good to be true. Usually it is too good to be true. And so I thought it would be fun to have the trumpet player manipulating the same musical material. And I was writing it all at the same time. And that's how it came about.
And this has been performed, obviously, Alison Balsam gave the premiere. No, she didn't give the premiere.
No, the premiere was given by Andrew McCandless with the Toronto Symphony, which I conducted, and then it was done a few times by Andrew, Sun Valley Festival in the United States, which I couldn't make, and then Alison Balsam played it with the Los Angeles Philharmonic for the first time last season, and then we did it with the Philadelphia Orchestra. That's the orchestra that's on the film Fantasia, just before Christmas. And then she is playing it, not with me conducting this time, but with a Russian conductor with the London Philharmonic in April, I think it is. And I'm hoping that we're going to do it with an New York Philharmonic in the next couple of years too. So it's getting a lot of performances today, recorded in the brass band version.
It's amazing. Do you ever have that moment where you take a step back and obviously it's a wonderful sort of journey, and it's wonderful that people in Foden's band that we have an opportunity to you're doing that thing again. So bashful. We'll talk about this. No, but that we have an opportunity to sort of to rub shoulders for a few days a year, or a few days every 6 years as it is. But do you ever take stock and think that the New York Philharmonic are playing your concerto with these people and in your operas coming out? And so from those beginnings in East London many years ago, it's a tremendous journey.
Actually, I think about that all the time. I get quite overwhelmed by it often. On New Year's Eve, this past New Year's Eve, I conducted a live television broadcast from Lincoln Center in the middle of New York with the New York Philharmonic, and I actually played the piano and conducted. And I don't think you can access the website, the public broadcasting website from the UK, but you can in America. And it was live, and I was sort of hosting to the air. And I think was, I remember when the first time I ever got phoned to go work with the New York Philharmonic. I was at my house in Winnipeg, and the phone rang, and the New York Philharmonic didn't even know who my agent was, so they rang me, but they'd heard about me, and would I come and do a concert with them? And I remember saying yes, I'd love to, and trying to sound all kind of, And then I put the phone down, and I thought, oh my gosh. And then for the next 18 months or so, I had the most terrible collywobbles. Anyway, I went and did it, and I thought, it doesn't matter how it goes the first time, I can say I've done it. And it went very well, and they invited me back. And the second time I went back to do a subscription concert. This subscription series of the New York Philharmonic is one of the most prestigious in the world in classical subscriptions. Everybody wants to conduct on the New York Philharmonic subscription series. And I got terribly nervous. And I've talked to other artists about this since. And in fact, Rennie Fleming, who I've worked with, wrote a little bit about a similar experience she had in her book. But about a week ago, I thought, I don't deserve this. I'm just a second baritone player from Ilford. My dad died when I was 15. I just come from humble beginnings, and I don't feel I should be doing this. And I had the most terrible collywobbles. And my wife is quite opinionated about almost everything. And very strong-willed, an incredible woman. She said, don't be ridiculous. And I said, I have to cancel, I can't go, I'm too nervous. She said, don't be ridiculous. Anyway, I got on the plane and I went to New York, and the New York Philharmonic has its own limousine and driver and chauffeur. And you arrive at the airport in John F. Kennedy, and they pick you up, and the driver's there in his uniform. And you get into the same car that Lauren Marcel, Kurt Masur, and Blomstedt, and all the great conductors, have ridden in. And the driver tells these stories about the conductors, so you're getting nervous. I'm in the car and I'm feeling I shouldn't be here. I don't deserve to be in this car. And I went into the hotel and I didn't sleep at all. And I was really nervous, and I wanted to throw up. This is the worst I've ever been with nerves. And I was having exactly this feeling you described. And the next morning, the car picked me up and took me to the hall. And I'm standing in the wings, waiting to go on stage. And the New York Philharmonic's there. And I remember turning around and seeing the exit sign and thinking, okay, I can be out of this building in 20 seconds. And I was on the verge of, I don't know what, when the oboe played the A to tune the orchestra. And at the second that oboe played the A, I went, and I thought, it's no big deal. This is what I do now. I'm very lucky. I should just get out there and do it. And I've never had such bad nerves again. And then when they eventually asked me to write them a piece, they commissioned me twice. The first time I thought I was terrified, but I wasn't anything like as nervous as that first time. And it's just sometimes this is why it's so important with kids in a school like this or any school. These precious lives that we work with kids, we get so much out of it. But every one of those kids has a narrative. Every one of those kids has a story. Every one of those kids has an ability. Every one of those kids is going to be a citizen when they grow up, and every one of those kids can contribute in a positive and meaningful way. and it's about enabling kids to realize that such things are possible. I never realized. I've given 125 concerts now with the New York Philharmonic. I never ever thought that would happen, ever. I conducted all the big 5 orchestras in America regularly now. I've conducted the London Symphony, as I was telling you, when I was quite young. So I never expected all of that. It just happened. Of course, it's what I do now. I mean, my wife is, very insouciant about it. She thinks it's no big deal at all. And to my girls, I'm not even the most important conductor in the house because my wife is the conductor of their kids' choir. So she's much more a celebrity than I am. So I mean, sometimes I think, how did it happen? But you know what? You work for it. You work very hard for it. And I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm a bit worried sometimes that I might wake up and find it's all gone away. But the nearer I get to death, the better I feel about it, because I think, I'm just going to enjoy it while it lasts, and it's been great.
It's great that we're back on death for the 3rd time this evening. Go back to what you were saying about the, every young child has a narrative, every young child's got an opportunity. I mean, this ties in nicely with your work with the National Youth Brass Band of Great Britain. You were appointed musical director in 2006, I believe.
Yeah, I'm technically artistic director.
Artistic, I'm sorry.
No, it's not a big deal.
Well, clearly it is.
Well, you should have got it right.
So you were appointed artistic director in 2006.
Yes.
Is that right? And it's 9 years. I mean, you've done some tremendous things. Not least taking the band for the very first time to the prom series at the Royal Albert Hall. How did the opportunity come about? And is it something that you would like to keep on doing, for a while? What are the benefits of working with such a talented bunch of young people?
The benefits are enormous. I get much more out of it than I put in, and I find it hard to believe that I've been given such a wonderful responsibility. When I was first asked, I had the 2 orchestras back in 2006. I was in the middle of the contracts with both orchestras. Our kids were like 5 and 6 years old. My son was 14, 15. So they were at difficult, hard ages. My wife wasn't teaching at that time. She was at home, but all the time living in Vancouver, and I was half the year in Luxembourg. And Philip Biggs, who runs the band, rang me up and said, the board has voted for you to be the new artistic director. What do you think about this? That's great. When can you start? And I turned the job down. And anyway, Philip didn't give up. We had lunch 3-4 times, and he kept going on about it. I was taken out with other people and talked to about it. And after a lot of this, my wife said, "You just better do it and get on with it." And I've got so much out of it. The band has actually performed several times at the proms, maybe 3 or 4 times, but hadn't performed for over 20 years. Right. But curiously enough, because most of my career has now taken place in North America, I've been in North America for 25 years. I hadn't actually conducted at the proms, so I made my debut at the proms with the National Youth Brass Band of Great Britain, and we had a fantastic concert. We had great reviews. The band played brilliantly, and the band was chosen to be part and parcel of the proms season launch. And I wrote a fanfare, which some of the band played at the press conference launch, and it was an amazing occasion. But I think much more importantly, there are 85 kids in the band, and they are very good young instrumentalists. And as you know, some of the kids have terrible stories. Some of them have great stories, places they come from. There was one boy who arrived, I remember 3 or 4 years ago, arrived at the course. He had one pair of filthy, dirty training pants and a t-shirt, and he was a sweet lad, but he was ungainly, he was big, he was gifted, but directionless outside the band. And we worked really hard with him during the week, and anyway, now this boy is going to music college. He's smart, he's focused, he's becoming a great member of society. He's still funny and he's still humorous and he's still the original person he was, but the band has been for him, I would say, and he says this actually, the saving thing in his life. It's really something that's really helped him, helped his focus. And I mean, he was having to come to courses on the train because his parents weren't giving him a lift or whatever, or the difficult things at home, difficult things. And so you see something like that transforming a kid's life. It's a big responsibility. I'm not an educator. I don't know about the subtleties of it. I'm just a professional musician, so I treat the kids like professionals. We have fun together. We're very structured about what's appropriate, what's inappropriate socially, and so on and so forth. I've got all those guidelines, and of course we all have to have the background checks and everything else. It's very, very beautifully run, as you know. And I get a lot of guidance from people like yourself who are teachers, and I love doing the job. I've done it for 9 years. I'm not sure how much longer I'll do it for, but at the moment I'm not planning to give it up. But it's a great privilege and pleasure going to a slightly darker place momentarily. The conductor of the National Youth Choir was recently imprisoned for inappropriate behaviour. He was a teacher at a music school where there was a terrible court case reported, and one of the girls who was a pupil who'd been abused committed suicide during the trial. It was very tragically sad, and this man was a brilliant musician, but it seemed he'd never understood actually really what he was there for in position and why you do it. If you do it for the kids, it's such a such a privilege. One of the music teachers I grew up with, who I never liked as a boy, is in jail right now for same kind of things. And I think it's important to realise that actually when children work in music, you're not teaching them maths or physics or English. You're actually teaching them how to deal with the language that expresses the narrative inside them. I teach you the violin, or I teach you the piano, and you play the violin or you play the piano, and you are expressing what's inside you. You're not trotting out some physics formula or some mathematical formula. You're dealing with everything at the core of that person. That's why it's so important that these kinds of issues need to be dealt with, because I think children are inspirational. They are templates for tomorrow. Everything about it is a privilege and an honour to be in that job. I've just, of all the things I've ever done in my life, it's by far and away the most important. Everything else pales into insignificance beside it.
Absolutely. I'd also like to reflect we've now had 40% of our conversation either about death or child abuse. It's been very interesting.
Well, yeah, sorry, I didn't really mean to take off on that, but yeah.
One thing, and I'm reminded at the time, and trying to avoid just sort of flitting over stuff, but one thing that we've not actually talked about is your relationship with Foden's band. And obviously I'm reminded that, this is something that's very, very personal to many of us in the room, but also, to our local community, and Foden's having been, around as it stands since 1900. Your mother originally was a big fan of the Black Dyke Band, and you were saying that they used to have holidays
in the Black Dyke Band room when she was growing up. Yes, my grandfather was from just outside Queensbury, Manningham. Yeah.
So your mother was a late convert to Foden's, but the relationship started with Foden's in the year 2000. I think we finally established, maybe kind of question ahead. Honestly, I've been a member of Foden's band for the last 5 years. I've been convinced that I've been a member of Foden's band for 20 years. I haven't. Glyn and I always have this conversation about who's been in the band longer. It is Glyn. But nonetheless, so your relationship started 20 years, in the year 2000 with Foden's band. You came across to conduct the Open, I think.
Yes.
And it was a piece by Michael Ball, and we think it was called Ceremony or something like that.
Yeah.
Who phoned you? What was the attraction, and why, having been working with the New York Phil and the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra and all those other wonderful organisations, what said in 2000, okay, this is time to go back to brass bands, which obviously is something you had been in with them in the past?
Well, I hadn't conducted a band for years, British band, since the mid-80s when I conducted GUS, and we won the British Open. That was the last time. And I did do one gig with one band in the mid-90s, and I did conduct a professional brass band in Toronto a couple of times, the Hannaford band who were playing on the Requiem recording. And I said to my wife, I really miss England. I mean, I regard myself, I'm not a Canadian citizen. I've become a permanent resident there, but I'm still, I regard myself as a British citizen. I've just lived in Canada for that time, and really wanted to do more in the banding world, because I really love the sound of band. And I wanted to write some music for band too, which I hadn't really done much of for 10, 15 years. So Colin Short, who is known to you, and was a Lancastrian, I think, he rang me on a really, really bad line from some pub at the top of the Pennines near Buxton. And Colin is
Eagle, I think.
Is that possible? Right. And Colin is the sort of person who uses one word where 25 is appropriate. And these noises, an incomprehensible Lancastrian accent. Anyway, we had to ring back about 3 times because I couldn't hear him, and then I couldn't understand what he was saying. And so he said, well, would I come and do the Open? And so we looked at the dates, it worked, and my kids were quite small, so my wife came with the kids. Kids were about 1 or 2 at that time. They're very close together. And my wife came too, and she saw how much I loved it. I mean, I really enjoyed doing it. But I came, like, the first rehearsal I did in Foden's, I was welcomed to the band, and I started at 7:30. At 10 o'clock I asked what time the rehearsal finished, and Alan Wynchley said, "Whenever you like, sir." So I just finished the rehearsal, but I didn't take a break, and the next night I asked about it. They said, well, the band would like a break, if comfort break if it's possible, because they've driven long distances. And so the next night I called a break, and everybody left the band room and just left me sitting in there. No one talked to me. And we rehearsed like that for about 10 days. No one said a word. They were all very respectful, very, very quiet. And then after we'd played at Symphony Hall in Birmingham, there was a huge ovation. It was really a fantastic performance. And I wandered into the hotel bar, and you were all sitting around there. The bar went really quiet. No one talked to me again. So I sat down at the bar and I started chatting, and then somebody, Dino I think it was, bought me a drink, and I started chatting. And you know, the big difference for me, John, is that I come here, when I go to conduct the New York Philharmonic, I have to be the maestro, I have to be separate. I've got friends in the orchestra, but it has to be a certain degree of separation. And even though they accept me as a musician, they know me well, I have to be like that. When I come to the Foden's band, it's the same thing. Everyone totally respects and does everything I ask as a conductor. But you guys all know where I came from, and we're mates. And that's the only place in the world I can go and have that. That's why I love coming here.
We're very pleased to have you. Just for
Thank you.
We're just kind of now really moving on towards the end, and I suppose one of the questions is what next? At the end of 2017, your tenure at the Vancouver...
2018.
2018, sorry, you didn't get the memo. Got it here somewhere. So at the end of 2018, your tenure at the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra comes to an end. This is something that you thought about and decided that's the right time. On the eve of their 100th anniversary, is that correct?
At their 100th anniversary, I became the music director laureate. I decided on that because I'd already had a very long, abnormally long, I would have been there 18 years, and my predecessor was there 9 years, and most orchestral conductorships last between 6 and 9 years.
So obviously you've made that decision. There's clearly still many, many years in front of you.
I hope so.
Well, without returning to our most popular subject of the evening. So I suppose my question is, are there any musical goals that the opportunities have not arisen? Are there any orchestras perhaps that you've wanted to conduct for which the opportunity's not arisen, or are there more writing projects or more personal things that maybe having that position that you've had with an orchestra has prevented you doing? Come 2018, when maybe the diary frees up a bit and there's more freedom, are there things that you'd still like to do?
Yeah, there are some things. Yes, there are lots of pieces I'd still like to conduct, but I mean, and to be a little bit freer would be nice. I got telephoned by the Boston Symphony 2 years ago. Ricardo Schei had cancelled, and they had 2 weeks in a row. Mendelssohn's Hymn of Praise Symphony the week before the Rite of Spring. They would like me to do both weeks. Could I go do both weeks? But I couldn't do the Rite of Spring because I was in Vancouver, and I couldn't think of a good enough reason to get them to change it. And I've had to miss. I did the Hymn of Praise Symphony, but I didn't do the Rite of Spring, and I think that would have been a great opportunity for me. But So that's happened a lot of times. So I'll be a little freer to be able to do things like that. But you know, I've never had a bucket list. I never ever thought that what has happened to me would happen to me. I mean, it never occurred to me. When I worked for the Royal Ballet, I expected to be at the Royal Ballet for 20, 25 years, just working at the Royal Ballet. And in fact, I haven't been there for 20, 25 years. And so I think, in a way, I've got a little bucket list of certain things I want to do and to write and to do. But all the orchestras that I ever imagined I've conducted and more. I haven't conducted Berlin, I haven't conducted Vienna. I have very strong views about women in orchestras and how we must have women in orchestras and how ridiculous it is that something like the Vienna Philharmonic has less than 10% women in the orchestra. In fact, less than 5%, I think. And I'd be hard put to say yes, frankly, if I was asked. But I haven't been asked, and I don't think I'm on their radar. Berlin, I haven't been asked. The other orchestra I would love to conduct, though, is the Amsterdam Concertgebouw. And I have been asked to do that, but I wasn't available to do it. And so, I mean, there's that. Maybe my opera performed somewhere else. I might write another opera, but you know what? It's time to give back now, and it's time to have a bit of fun. So I hope, actually, that when I do free up a bit, if you guys will still have me, that I'll still be able to come to Foden's as often as possible, because I do really, sincerely love it from the bottom of my heart. I think I'd like to, if I don't do the youth band for ever, I think I would like to contribute more to that organisation. I'm on the board of a couple of charities that I get involved with locally in Vancouver. A couple of, actually, particularly an AIDS charity that I'm on the advisory board of. I've been putting a lot of time into that, but I think I was putting a lot of time into that. I haven't done recently because I've been so busy, but I love doing those kinds of things. I'd like to be a citizen, but you know what? I can play the piano and I can make people laugh. If I give a concert in an old people's home or something like that, I get a big kick out of that. I enjoy playing at schools, playing for kids. I love doing sort of events like this, and I love conducting and composing. And people, you know, as my wife says to me, you go to work and 2,500 people stand up and applaud you. You call that work? How hard can it be? And, so I think it's time to give something back.
I think, and it's also probably a time for us to draw this close. Bramwell Tovey, thank you very much indeed.
You're welcome.